This is Bolivar, Ecuador. Bolivar is a small fishing and clam harvesting village of 450 people. The village is on an island off the northwest Pacific coast of Ecuador. The people who live in Bolivar don't make very much money. The men primarily work off the island as day laborers, and the women stay home in Bolivar to spend their time caring for the family. They help make ends meet by working in the garden and harvesting clams to sell. People here used to make a decent living by harvesting clams, but massive commercial shrimp farming has taken away the clam habitat. There aren't many clams left. There's no road to Bolivar and no bridge to connect the island to the mainland. In order to travel between the mainland and the island, people have to walk about 45 minutes from a bus stop to where they can catch a dugout canoe. Until recently, there was no running water in Bolivar, and electricity in the village was available only a few hours a day, if that. There's a small primary school on the island, but young people who want to go to high school have to leave the island to do so. The folks who live here have a lot of needs. All of this seems like a long way from Wisconsin. But in May of 2002, a retired lawyer and grandmother from New Glarus landed her canoe and stepped onto this small island with a mission to work with the people of Bolivar to help them meet those needs. Her name is Jeanne Meyer, and the reason she's here is because she's a United States Peace Corps volunteer. The Peace Corps calls what she does community development. Jeanne had been in Ecuador for more than 2 years when we visited, and her tour of duty in Bolivar was about to end. The Peace Corps has been working in Ecuador for over 4 decades, but Jeanne was the first volunteer to work in Bolivar. It turns out that Jeanne Meyer was particularly suited to help the citizens of Bolivar. Jeanne Meyer was a Peace Corps volunteer before, in 1963. She was Jeanne Ellefson then, and she worked in an education project in neighboring Colombia. Now, having raised a family on a Wisconsin farm, becoming a lawyer, and retiring after a lifetime of work, she's back in the Peace Corps, this time in Bolivar, Ecuador. This is a story about an amazing woman who left her old life in Wisconsin to help organize a struggling community very different from her own halfway around the world. In Bolivar, Ecuador, she was confronted again, as she was more than 4 decades ago in Colombia, with the massive cultural and communication differences between middle-class Wisconsin and a Spanish-speaking community. Her story sparked interest in a group of University of Wisconsin-Whitewater students studying cross-cultural communication. 2 of the Whitewater students, Heather Bonnet and Justin Price, traveled to Ecuador to get a first-hand view of Jeanne Meyer working in Bolivar. They wanted to take a closer look at this complicated process of communicating across cultures. Ecuador is a small Andean country on the west coast of South America. The country is wedged between Colombia on the north and Peru on the south. Ecuador got its name from being right on the equator. It can be hot on the coast and in the rainforest, but the majority of Ecuadorians live in the cool highlands. Most people who live in these mountain areas are descendants of the indigenous people who lived at the northern extreme of the 16th century Inca Empire. Ecuador also has a long Pacific coastline. Most of the people who live on the coast descended from African slaves who were brought to Ecuador by the Spaniards in the 1500s. Over the centuries, those descendants mixed with the people who were already here. On a rainy afternoon, Jeanne told Heather and Justin about how 500 years ago, a ship with 23 slaves that was captained by an African slave, Alonso de Illescas, foundered on a reef just off the island of Bolivar. Alonso saw an opportunity and ran off with the slaves.
1853. And he ruled this part of Ecuador, much to the chagrin of the Spaniards, till about 1585. And then his sons took over and eventually had to put together some kind of an agreement with Quito, with the Spanish government. But during that time, this was run as an independent black republic, the Zambo Republic it was called. And Alonso had come from Spain. He had been captured as a child slave in Cape Verde, off Africa, and taken to Spain. But for some reason, he must have been a very, very special person, because his master let him learn Spanish to read and write. He could read and write Spanish. He played musical instruments, including Western musical instruments, not just African instruments. He was taught armaments and defense, which was very unusual. And he was baptized. And so we think that historians believe that he was much loved by his master and in fact was treated like a son.
As we said, the people in Bolivar at one time made their living by harvesting clams in the mangrove forests. However, in recent years, the development of shrimp farming has had a major effect on their livelihood. The mangrove forests were cut down in order to make more room for shrimp beds. Jeanne told Heather Bonnet that shrimp farming has greatly reduced the number of clams that a worker can gather in a day, which affects the source of income for the residents of Bolivar and other coastal towns.
And so that whole ecology has been drastically changed. And the people here on the island tell me that years ago, before the shrimp beds, they could go out and gather. They were mainly gatherers, hunters and gatherers. They would gather crabs and little bivalve clams that they call conchas. And a good shell hunter could get maybe 1,200 conchas in a day. That was a good income for a family. Today, most of them are happy if they get 100 or 150, and they get paid $3 for 100 shells or clams. And that's enough, maybe enough money to buy their rice and plantain and maybe milk for the family for the day. So it's very, very existence for a lot of the families that don't have other sources of income, and there really are no sources of income here. That's one of the things that we want to work on, is develop some other sources of income, including maybe tourism or ecotourism.
Fanny Mina Tenorio is a local leader in coastal Ecuador. To her, the restoration of the mangrove forests along the coast is essential. As she told Bill Johnson, a professor who accompanied the Whitewater students to Bolivar, the manglares, as the mangroves are called in Spanish, are essential because they sustain life.
Es muy importante porque es una fuente de vida. Es una fuente de vida para todos nosotros y sobre todo sirve como barrera protectora de los fenómenos naturales. Y también sirve para evitar la salinización de los bosques húmedos tropicales. Por eso es importante. Y por otra parte también es importante porque de ahí se extraen todos los recursos naturales que se desarrollan, se multiplican en ese ecosistema. Y es fuente de trabajo, de ahí se extrae los recursos para la venta y para la alimentación. Por todas esas cosas, porque sirven para la educación de nuestros hijos, ya que en nuestro medio no hay industrias, no hay fábricas, no hay microempresas. Entonces es la gente más marginada que vive de este sector y es la única fuente que tenemos. Por eso es importante el ecosistema manglar.
But how does a foreign volunteer from Wisconsin suggest to rural Ecuadorians that they should get together and take action to improve their lives? It's a challenge, but meeting that challenge is central to what the Peace Corps does. The local representative of the Esmeraldas provincial government, Hugo Mera Gonzalez, admitted to Bill Johnson that the local folks were a little intimidated by Jeanne at first, but she soon won them over.
Hasta que ya llegamos el momento que hemos comido juntos en su casa, hemos hecho mingas, hemos ido a los trabajos, ella adelante con nosotros y como le digo, deja muchos recuerdos y para nosotros lo más bonito que hemos tenido en nuestro pueblo es a la doctora Jeanne en buscar la transformación, la forma de cómo es que debemos vivir con civilización y cómo es que debemos de buscar la mejora a beneficio de nuestras comunidades.
Maybe one clue to Jeanne's success is that her early life growing up on a small Wisconsin dairy farm near Darlington wasn't so different in some ways from rural Ecuador today. Another member of the cross-cultural communication class at UW-Whitewater, Mike Dietrichs, visited the farm and talked with Diana Pattinson, Jeanne's sister. According to her, life on the farm in the 1940s and 50s wasn't easy.
Well, we had a regular pump that we'd have to hand pump the water and bring that into the house. I do remember when we got electricity. I was in grade school then, and I remember coming home and Mama had gotten an iron and she had an iron plugged in to iron clothes, and she had made 3 shirts that day and she was ironing them. She did all the sewing, all our clothes. She sewed all our clothes for us. The house itself was very small. There was one little bedroom downstairs, which was my mom's. There was a small living room and a kitchen. And upstairs was 2 bedrooms. One was a boy's bedroom and one was the girl's bedroom. That was it. I can remember 5 of us in each room. When Sheila and Jorge, the 2 youngest ones, they got to go through high school with indoor plumbing. We always called them the brats because they got the indoor plumbing.
Jeanne's father worked in the Chicago meatpacking plants. So like the kids in Bolivar, whose fathers worked away from home most of the time, Jeanne's dad wasn't home much either. Jeanne's mother ran the farm and raised 11 children pretty much by herself.
He worked in Chicago and as a butcher and he'd come home on weekends once in a while, not a lot, but obviously quite a bit. But months might go by that he'd never get home. So that was my mom that was really in charge of raising all the kids and taking care of everything.
But as similar to Jeanne's rural background might be to some aspects of life in Bolivar, Jeanne believes that culture matters, and everyone is a product of his or her unique life experiences.
I think that if a mistake I probably made early on in Colombia was that I was looking for similarities, I wasn't looking for differences, and I think sometimes when you look too hard for similarities, you gloss over the differences, which do matter. And I really question myself after even being here as long as I have that I really don't know if it's possible to sort of get inside the head of another culture, no matter how well you speak the language, no matter how. I just think it does matter. I think that we are such a product of our own experience, and our own culture has such a powerful influence on us, wherever we grow up in the world, that it's so what happens is you've got to try to really be patient and try, instead of be non-judgmental if you can do that, because we are all products of our environment and what influenced us growing up and living in wherever we are. And so I think coming to And I think that age does help in kind of being accepting, not approving necessarily, but accepting that this is the way things are here, or this is how people feel, it's what they believe, or it's what's important to them. For instance, I think that I'm amazed at how much money gets spent on their annual fiesta. And you and I might think, well, maybe they should spend the money on books for the kids, or shoes for the kids, or da-da-da-da-da. But I know that this culture really highly values that celebration every year, and they all look forward to it. It's when everybody comes home. The kids come home to the city. The people who've moved away bring their families home. It's not just the fiesta. It's a homecoming. And so it's important, just like our homecomings or our Christmas or other Thanksgiving or other celebrations that we have. So, I think you just have to be really careful about equating, because differences are good too, and they're just differences. Doesn't mean they're better, worse. We're better, worse. And so I think that that's a lesson that anybody who's going to be effective in working in another culture, has to kind of come to terms with.
Peace Corps volunteers live in the communities where they're assigned. That way, each volunteer commits to the community and helps it to find its own collective voice. Fanny Tenorio sees Jeanne's ability to organize as one of her strongest values to Bolivar.
Que está permanente y está motivando a la gente para que reclame sus derechos, para que se organice, para que pidamos, exijamos lo que nos hace falta. Entonces sí es importante.
The key to development is getting the community leaders themselves to set goals and decide on their own priorities. It isn't enough to impose priorities from the outside.
I have to explain to you a little bit about my philosophy of development, and it is that you can't come into a community and just say, oh, wouldn't XYZ be great, and let's do it, and I'll get the money, and I'll write home and establish something. Because I think then we talk a lot about buy-in in the States. I think the people have to be the ones who develop the ideas, and then you can help them accomplish it. So actually, a couple of the leadership came to me in the community and said, we realize that we don't have a plan for, what do we do first, how do we do it, who's going to work on it, who's going to work on what project. So, and we know you know how to do planning, so can you teach us? And so we did a 2-day strategic planning session with all of the community leaders. That meant all the political leaders, the government leaders, the leaders of each organization. And we actually formed a committee of that leadership. And so it's called the Community Development Committee. And so what we do is identify community resources, what are the needs, and then what are the priorities. And then we set up committees and who's going to do the work. So that committee is working very effectively, I think. And then the second group is a group of young people, a youth group of people in their late teens and early 20s who, number one, are very enthusiastic, they have a lot of energy, and they're interested in making their community a better place. So those two things, I think.
Hugo Mayer Gonzalez says that Jeanne as a lawyer has been a great teacher in the community, showing Bolivar's leaders how to get things done.
Y la forma como debemos de luchar para llegar hasta la puerta de una institución y golpearle para que nos atienda. Hemos hecho comisiones con ella adelante y hemos conseguido. Aunque no está todo terminado como ustedes están ocultando, aquí no hay todo terminado, pero sí, como es el agua potable, que es uno de los líquidos importantes en todo el pueblo, también la energía eléctrica, y como digo, el otro deseo que tanto ella tenía era de que nosotros saliéramos en un carro hasta aquí frente a Bolívar, pero desgraciadamente no se pudo.
Well, we've worked on a lot of basic necessities, and really, although my assignment here has been to work in sustainable agriculture, and I've done some work in gardening and helping some of the farmers solve pest problems, my major work has been in community development, because when I came, there were no lights in the community. There was no running water. We didn't have a doctor. We didn't have a technician who could test for malaria. We didn't have a hospital boat. And you know, now we have all of those things. We're working on lots of other things that the community doesn't have, but we're talking basic needs. So that's, and it hasn't been because I'm here that all those things happen, but I was able to help motivate people and help you know, energize them, because it's hard work trying to get some of those things. We're very isolated from government agencies and so forth. People don't have money for buses to get to the cities where they need to go to the ministries. So it's hard. It's very hard for poor people to mobilize to accomplish anything. And so just sort of helping them keep that energy going so that they would continue to fight, even though, you know, you feel like giving up. So I think that's been helpful, and I think that's, you know I'm not going to have to live here all my life, and so I can push the enthusiasm more than maybe I could if I knew that this was it, and I was always going to be dealing with this forever, these kinds of issues. So I think that's been helpful to the community.
Now that Jeanne is at the end of her 2-year stay in Bolivar, will her work continue? Will her hard work have a lasting impact? The president of the Bolivar Town Council has little doubt that it will.
Haber trabajado 2 años con una persona, haberse acostumbrado ya a sus ideas, es un poco doloroso, digamos, el momento que ya se despida. Pero creo que de todas maneras, si ella se va, no nos va a olvidar, porque de una u otra manera vamos a estar en comunicación con las personas que van a quedar aquí. Me imagino que ha de venir Jeanne algún día, al año, 2 años, no sé, a darse una vuelta a su pueblo, porque ella la consideramos nosotros como una boliviaña más. Entonces, creo que en ese aspecto no vamos a tener inconveniente. Ya le digo, va a ser un poco doloroso el momento que ella se despida. Con las otras personas que van a venir, seguiremos el mismo ritmo de trabajo. Vamos a seguir los mismos proyectos, buscar incluso más posibilidades de conseguir beneficios para la comunidad, y vendrán otras ideas para beneficio del pueblo.
At the end of our visit to Bolivar, 2 young Peace Corps volunteers arrived to introduce themselves to the town before they take Jeanne's place in a couple of weeks. There'll be a lot for the new volunteers to learn, and a lot for them to work on after Jeanne leaves. In the meantime, it was pretty clear to Heather and Justin that a real exchange took place between Jeanne and the people of Bolivar over the past 2 years. Jeanne left her mark on the village, and she will have gained a lot as well.
I think that when I compare it to my first experience, which I think was very enriching because I was so inexperienced and naive, this one has been enriching. And if anything, it has reinforced my belief that we can all have impact. Oh, stop the machine! You know, that all of us have something to offer, and that I think we have an obligation to help others wherever they are.